Okay. Okay. All right. We're ready to go. Um, for those who came a little bit late, we didn't really start till now. Okay. What I was saying was that depending on the history of the country, the systems that are in place are sometimes easy to change, sometimes difficult to change. The older the country, the older the history, the more tradition there is, and people are set in their ways. So it's not easy to change things rapidly. Whereas the newer countries like the USA and Australia, they can set new regulations and people accept them because the composition of the population is also new. They've come from other places, they feel they are new in that place, and therefore their mindset is quite different. Now, today we are going to talk about the issues related to managing populations that have gotten old. It's called aged care management. Now, we talked about the fact that the whole world is getting older. The proportion of older people is increasing, and depending on the country, the rate at which it is changing is different. And depending on how much wealth the country has, the systems they have in place are different. Sri Lanka is a very poor country with almost no resources. So we don't have a lot of support services. And even the services that we have may look good on paper, but getting the services, access to services, may not be convenient. We have language issues, we have transport issues, we have attitude issues, um, with very little supervision. Uh, we have two students from last year's batch who have written very nice papers which you should read. One has looked into the barriers that exist in Sri Lanka to get even the little resources that are available. The government has done a few things to help the aged, but mostly in terms of poverty reduction. They're kind of related. Usually people who have enough money can find some kind of help. The poor are the ones who don't find it. That's general principle in life. But there are either intentional or unintentional barriers in terms of trying to get even the little help available. One of our students has written a very good paper after doing some research, uh, trying to identify what the barriers are. And it was all done by interviewing people who were old, who were admitted to the hospital for some kind of tragedy, some kind of injury. And they would relate what problems they have. And this student has classified those barriers in different areas, and a very good paper. You should read that. It's very good. Another one did a study on matching the needs of the older people and the ability of the caregiver, whether there is a mismatch between the two. Nowadays in Sri Lanka, there are many companies that advertise that they will send helpers uh, to look after the old people, either during the day or maybe over a 24-hour period, maybe shifts. And are those people really qualified? Did they get any kind of training anywhere? Or is it just the kind of job they are doing with absolutely no common standards? And the people who are supposed to get the services, they expect this person to know almost everything, but find out, oh, they don't know how to do this, they don't know how to do that. And it's because there may be cultural differences, language differences, various attitudes, expectations may be either too high or too low. There's a mismatch. Uh, Maybe there should be some regulations that before you call yourself a personal caregiver, you should have maybe attended some classes, should have been taught what the whole idea of getting old is about, and learn a few things like basic first aid, and then how to use comforting language and make it pleasant for the older person. Older people are basically vulnerable. They have no power. It doesn't matter how rich you may be, when you are old and when you are disabled, you are vulnerable. If people neglect you, either intentionally or unintentionally, you can't do anything about it. If you have some family around you, maybe they might help a little bit. But by and large, you get neglected. That is the fact of life. So if there are systems that either prevent or delay, or systems that punish people who neglect the elderly, then maybe the situation might improve. So if there are enough regulations in a country, it might help to prevent neglect. That will depend on how rich the country is in a way. So we are going to talk about those different issues. Now, the documentary that we are going to watch is about the situation in the United States at the moment. You have to know something about the United States first. It's called the United States because it's not in a way one country. It's 50 countries that are united. 50 countries because they have 50 states. And each state has got its own rules and regulations. There are some regulations that are common to the whole country. Those are called federal rules. Now, you know, in Sri Lanka also there's a lot of talk about federal movements and trying to break up our unity and la 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 la, all these political speeches we hear. Sri Lanka is a very small country compared to the United States. To fly from one end of the United States to the other end in a jet that travels at about 500 miles per hour in 6 hours. That's how big the country is. So, the country is vast. The population is about 350 million. And there are rich states and poor states. And the federal government sometimes takes money from the rich states and gives it to the poor states. The rich states are complaining. Oh, what is this? Those guys are lazy, all those guys are this and that. We are taking our money and giving it to them. But that's the nature of the United States. We try to keep a certain balance between the states. Okay? But yet all the rules and regulations are very different. Certain basic rules are the same, but a lot of rules are very different. Now, I have a medical license in 3 states in the United States. I have one in Hawaii, I have one in California, and I have one in Nevada. I may be a great doctor in California. If I go to New York, I am not a doctor. Really, I am not a doctor. Because I am not from that state, I am not registered in that state as a doctor. And the rules and regulations there are different from California. Maybe I can use the same antibiotic and all of that, but their system is different. And that is in medicine. UK, for example, law, differences are sometimes they are ridiculous. In one state here, it might be murder. But if you cross the line and go to the other state, it's not murder, it's something similar, but not murder. And you suggest law to cross. What's the meaning of this? So people cross borders just to avoid being caught doing bad things. So there are some federal laws to try and control those things. But, just like our politicians, they can do a lot of bad things and I don't know. I don't know what happens. But that's the way the country runs. So when it comes to aged care, at the moment, it is not regulated. Healthcare is regulated to some extent, but not aged. As we get older, we get more sick. So at some point, it's a combination of not age and health. There's a very difficult line as to just getting old, a problem, and then getting old, and a problem that gradually begins to affect, like high blood pressure or diabetes, or your eyesight getting bad, or your hearing getting bad. So, if you are just plain old, maybe it's easy to look after. But if you're old and you got a sickness, then maybe it's more difficult. Not that. It is. And depending on the degree of seriousness of the illness, it can be very serious. So that the illness takes precedence over age. They don't look at the person as, oh, no, this will got a heart attack and he is this and you forget about the age. You're talking about the illness. So you have to accommodate both these ideas. Some countries, they have very strict rules about themselves, but not in the United States. Now in Sri Lanka, we also don't have a lot of rules and regulations to that. So in a way, we are like the United States. But the difference is that the United States has money, and here we don't have. And because the United States has money, the population at large, the average population by UN, we expect a good return for our money. If we cross the street and go to the ham restaurant across the place there, and we say, hey, give me some Chinese rolls, and you take the Chinese roll, you take one bite, and you find that it's full of air, there's nothing inside the roll. You know that you've been cheated. So then maybe you will not go back to that place. So they have to maintain a certain quality to get customers to come back. So in the same way, when aged care organizations, when they advertise their services, they have to be honest and provide a decent, basic, and ethical kind of service. In the United States, those regulations are very lax, very lax. It is in a way a very sad state of affairs because you would expect that the country would have the best laws in the world. Of course, that's the nature of private business. There has to be a crisis before the government will look up and say, oh my gosh, we got to do something about it. Too many old people are dying in nursing homes. We got to stop this. And then they will begin to use laws. So there has to be some kind of a signal from the population before they will take action. So if that population segment is very small, basically you don't have much power. But if that population is very large, then you have some power. At the moment, the richest people in America are the old people. People above the age of about 60 are considered the richest people in America. So they are the ones who worked for the last 60 years when America boomed after World War II. They put a lot of money into their pension plans, this and that, and they are living off of that wealth. And they have really very large communities that are just for old people. You can buy a house and various other things, and the whole place is geared only for the old people. There's a doctor there in that community, and it's what we call a gated community. There's a gate, you can't just walk in there. You have to be someone who's resident there. You can have guests and all that, but they have golf courses, and they have cooking, and they have music and dancing and religious services and everything, but it's community. Now we are living across a place called Mambulpiti Flat. Everybody knows that, huh? Mambulpiti Flat, it's across the road. Started about the mid 1950s when I was about age 12 or so. And it was a new concept in Sri Lanka. It was a new concept. They had small apartments in Colombo together. This was huge. This was like, I think 350 or 400 apartments. So it became one big unit. In the United States, I mean, they have huge, I mean, they're like 200, 300 acres of land. So those are what the rich people can afford. But there are a lot of poor people who can't afford. And so you can see a great variety in the quality of services that you get for your money. Now this is about just getting old. No regulations. In USA. In Australia, everything is regulated. How much water you must spend on washing your plate, and how much temperature of the hot water should be. The person who's providing the service got no hepatitis and got no this and no that and no TB, I mean, all kinds of rules and regulations. So there is quite a variety in terms of quality. Um, in America, once you hit age 65, your medical care is basically free. Basically, okay? It's like maybe our government service. Although the government doesn't run the hospitals and all that, the government just pays the money to the hospital. For that you have to be at least age 65. And they started doing that only since about 1935. It's not been in place for a very long time. That is related only to health matters, not just age. So if you are old plus you have a health problem in the United States, they concentrate more on the health issue. They're not too concerned about where you live and whether there's enough space there and whether you get to the hospital without using costly transport and all that. They're not used to those. Come to the hospital, we take care of you, you finish and you go out. Where you go back to, they're not too concerned. So there are different approaches, variations in terms of the support services we can enjoy. Now, because of the fact that there are no rules, there is a lot of abuse. There's a lot of abuse. Okay? So one of the things we have to be aware of is a concept called elder abuse. Elder abuse. In a way, it's like intentional neglect of the elder. Elder abuse. I can have a company that advertises, oh, the best care, send your grandmother to us, we will take care of her, and, we will comb her hair, and we will give her nice food to eat, and, we will change the bed sheets every day, and then you go and visit your grandmother, then you find, oh, they haven't changed the bed sheets in 2 weeks, and the food they get is, terrible, and she has not been given a bath. And you find that it's not what they advertise, but they've already taken your money. Then if you have to go looking for another place, then you are a little bit wise. You won't believe the advertisement. You want to go and take a look and see how. Mean exactly what they say. So there's a lot of abuse there. And it's not necessarily physical abuse, but abuse of a phenomenon that is not regulated, because there are not enough rules and regulations. You tend to cheat and you can profit. It's a very sad story. Very sad story. But that is happening a lot in the United States. 50 different countries, 50 different sets of rules and regulations. In some states, the rules may be a little bit tighter. In some states, there are no rules at all. And typical of the United States, it's a capitalist country. Business, making money, is basically the driving force. In fact, Americans are very proud to say we don't want government. They are the ones who set all these rules and they mess up the system for us. We want them to protect our borders, that's true. We want them to give our children a reasonable education, that's true. We want them to give us good roads and bridges and airports. Yeah, that's true. But don't tell me how to spend my money. Don't tell me what doctor I should go to. Don't tell me to do this. Don't tell me to do that. We don't want your advice. We can look after ourselves. Well, you can if you have enough resources, but sometimes there's always the poor people who can't do all that. So, in that respect, America is no different from a lot of other countries. They have rich people and they have poor people, and they have a big segment in the middle that they call the middle class. So now today we will see a documentary about what happens when you get old and then maybe you get a little bit sick and you're put into the wrong location and then you get neglected. It leads to disaster. And who's accountable? And who make the money? That kind of situation. Um, you will find that it's kind of a sad story at the end of it. But then the whole point is to learn from this. Now, who made this document? Who made this document? America has a lot of different people who have a lot of different interests. And there are certain organizations that do what is called investigative journalism. They go and they dig and they dig and they dig and they look for information. And then they make a movie out of it, they make a document, they write a book. And that's how sometimes awareness increases. So when people begin to say, "Oh, we didn't know this was happening." So in America there is a system of public broadcasting. It's like it's not really the federal government that's doing it, but the federal government gives a lot of money. And individual organizations that have made a reputation of being honest, uh, they are given money by the government to go and investigate. So it's not the government that is investigating. The government does not have a vested interest. It's the individual. If I want to go and look into something, I tell them, hey, give me some money, I'd like to go and do this. They will give me the money and I will go and do it because I'm interested. I'm not working for the government. I might find something that says, hey, the government is doing something bad. But then give me the money. So investigative journalism is a very big thing in the United States. And it's done by an organization called PBS, Public Broadcasting System, PBS. And they make the best quality documentaries about almost any subject, almost any subject. Whatever you want to study about, we go to PBS and they have this library of documentaries, maybe about 2,000 or 3,000 of them. And you can sit and watch and learn. It is unbelievable how much information you get. So they have 3 or 4 related subjects. We are going to talk only about getting older in what they call assisted living facility. But there are related things about death and dying, compassion, various other aspects related to aged care. Separate. We are only going to talk about assisted living. So in America, the word they use for aged care is really called assisted living. You can't live by yourself, you need assistance. Remember we talked about activities of daily living last time? And then we talked about a thing called instrumental activities of daily living. So those kinds of things are what these assisted living facilities are supposed to provide. But you can see how in a way sad or how fraudulent some of these systems are. But it's considered an advanced country, modern. So there's a lot of material that we can learn. So we're going to start watching that from now for about half an hour, okay? Not half an hour. It's going to go for about an hour. Okay, ready to go. You can see it says PBS SoCal, Public Broadcasting Service, Southern California. Okay, every state has got its public broadcasting service, okay? And this particular program is called Frontline. That's the name of the series. Can you hear the... Huh? I wonder how we can control the volume.
Seniors are paying sky-high prices out of their own pockets.
You can charge $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month.
For last year, Frontline
You can hear
have been
them.
investigating this growing industry.
You don't have to worry about federal government rules and regulations like you have to with a nursing home.
And the country's largest assisted living company.
They did not have the state-required training. They didn't have the emeritus required training.
And examining the care this for-profit chain provides to tens of thousands of seniors.
The biggest thing I always heard was 100%. Fill the building 100%.
Correspondent A.C. Thompson interviewed Insider
Really can't cover that.
telling their stories for the first time.
Did you worry?
Hey, I've got an impossible task here. I could do something that leads to somebody's death all the time.
Tonight on Frontline, life and death in assisted living.
The head of a state licensing agency told me assisted living is the rock we don't want to look under.
So this is 1940, is that right?
Yes, this was the championship game. Yeah,
Oh, look. There he
there
is.
he is. Yeah,
Carrying the ball.
yes,
That's
right in
right,
the middle
number
with his
5.
curly hair. Yeah,
Is that him?
yes,
Right
he's
there?
got the ball right
Yeah,
there.
there he goes.
Yeah, he just intercepted that and now is just running and making his way through. Yeah, and just scored.
Touchdown.
I believe this is when they scored. If the score was
73 to nothing.
You can hear
It
it
was a
okay?
game that Daddy talked about the most, I think.
George McAfee had a remarkable life. In the 1940s and 50s, he was the star running back for the Chicago Bears. He won 3 NFL championships and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
He didn't really talk about that
Mm-mm.
that much. In fact, my mother wanted to place plaques of his in our den, and the only place he would let her put them was behind this door, so that when the door was open, you couldn't see them.
I see all these photos and he seems like he's just loving his later years.
He enjoyed being around his family. He would just light up when he saw the grandkids, the great-grandkids.
But in his 70s, George became one of the more than 5 million Americans suffering from dementia.
I guess we first started noticing that there were some changes in Daddy's behavior. He would go to the bank, and he could get there, but once he got there, he couldn't remember why he was there.
His daughters began searching for a facility that could care for their father. They chose Cypress Court, an assisted living home that charged more than $4,000 a month.
When I saw the court, a couple things impressed me. The residents were free to access the outside and walk or sit. I thought we had just struck gold as far as a home for him.
But then, the facility was bought by the Emeritus Corporation, a nationwide chain. The sisters say they began to see changes.
His room would be dirty, and he would just be unkept, like he hadn't showered.
I know for a fact that his sheets weren't being changed, his laundry was not being done. I would come home with his laundry, do his laundry myself. I would clean his room many times when I would go over.
Yeah, he hadn't showered.
He looked like a dirty old man.
One night, George left his room and went wandering through the facility. Records show that for almost half an hour, there was no one on duty in his wing of the building, and workers had failed to lock away a bottle of industrial-strength dishwashing liquid. At some point that night, George picked it up and drank it. It contained a highly caustic chemical, which severely burned his lips, esophagus, and lungs.
When he was in the hospital, his face almost looked like what you picture in a horror story of a death mask. And I hope that he wasn't aware of what was going on. But we certainly were afraid that he was just in horrific pain, because he would almost try to sit
Oh,
up.
one time he did sit up
He did sit up.
and opened his eyes. Yeah.
And we said, Daddy, we're right here.
The hospital couldn't save George, and on March 4th, 2009, he died. The state of Georgia found Emeritus negligent in George's death. The sisters sued the company and settled with them. Now they're speaking publicly for the first time.
He suffered a horrific death. And our children saw it, our husband saw it, we saw it, and
I remember just sitting by his bedside praying that God would just go ahead and take him, because he wasn't going to get any better. And I just felt like he was suffering so horribly.
After your father died, the state did an investigation, and the state said, we're going to fine this facility $601.
well, in my opinion, I think they just got a slap on the wrist. And I've said all along, had this been a daycare facility where a child died, the place would have been shut down. And to only get a fine of $601, I just think is outrageous.
It means nothing. Nothing.
The Emeritus Corporation is headquartered here in Seattle, Washington. We asked the CEO, Granger Cobb, about what happened to George McAfee.
The incident with, the tragedy, I should say, with Mr. McAfee was devastating for all of us. And it was a situation, it was human error. We had a staff member that failed to secure a locked cupboard. Mr. McAfee got access to this dishwashing liquid, drank it, and had absolutely tragic results. Our heart goes out to the family. When you're dealing with this many residents, particularly a population that can have unpredictable behavior or is frail and is kind of a high risk population to begin with, we will have situations from time to time, but they're the vast, minority. I mean, it is really the exception to the rule.
Welcome to Emeritus, where you'll find all the comforts of home.
Cobb heads a company that has long been at the forefront of the assisted living industry.
You can teach the skills, but you can't teach the passion. You have to have a passion for seniors.
Offers a full spectrum of
Assisted living was created to offer seniors who could no longer live on their own a more home-like environment than nursing homes. And since most facilities offered little or no medical care, they were loosely regulated.
seniors to enjoy their golden years to the fullest.
Assisted living blew up in the 1990s. It grew very rapidly. Do you think that companies were attracted to this sector of senior care because it had less regulation than nursing homes?
Oh, I'm sure, and particularly the for-profit companies. When you look at a system, you don't have to worry about federal government. You don't have to worry about rules and regulations like you have to with a nursing home, for example. And you can charge whatever the market can bear. I mean, if people are willing to pay $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month for care, you can charge that. And there's no limitations on fee increases.
With those kind of prices and the enormous cash flow they generate, Emeritus has been embraced by Wall Street. The company's shares trade on the New York Stock Exchange. Last year, it took in nearly $1.6 billion in revenue. And with the baby boomers starting to retire, Emeritus is looking to grow even bigger.
So the 75 plus demographic is growing by about 400,000 individuals per year. So there's this increasing demand, and frankly, out 15 years when the baby boomers start hitting, it's going to grow by 1 million a year. And so there's this huge demand that is already here and on the horizon that is going to increase. And I think that, what we're looking at is to be able to service that demand as it continues to grow.
But increasingly, that demand has been coming from seniors with complex medical problems.
When we were trying to figure out what assisted living is or was, I had this image that it was apartment-style buildings where people had a lot of independence, they didn't need a lot of assistance.
Catherine Hawes studies the assisted living industry.
And then we did the first national study, and of course that wasn't what assisted living was. People showed up in wheelchairs and walkers. It wasn't the well elderly who were out golfing, on the weekends. And there was this big emphasis of, is there a parking place for every resident? These are not people who can drive. And there were these spiral staircases, which no one ever uses. Because if all you need is hospitality, you don't leave your home. Most of us want to stay in our home as long as we can.
In her study for the Department of Health and Human Services, Hawes found that while residents in assisted living didn't have as many physical limitations as people in nursing homes, many suffered from Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia.
When you go into assisted living, you see a lot of cognitive impairment. So there's a lot of early memory loss, short-term memory loss, a lot of impaired decision-making.
Newer research shows that the number of residents with dementia is rapidly increasing.
We found that about 2/3 at any point in time have dementia. So the majority, and the implications therefore are anybody who operates assisted living needs to know that dementia is the major player. It's the major condition that leads to people to living there.
Hello.
To meet the growing demand for dementia care, Emeritus has been opening memory care facilities across the country.
Understanding how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain.
But though residents now need much more care, assisted living remains loosely regulated.
The overall needs of each resident.
Now, we pretend assisted living facilities are not medical facilities. They're non-medical. And yet, the people who are in these facilities today have acute medical needs. The same people who are in assisted living today are the people who were in nursing homes 10 years ago. And this is not to say that all the facilities aren't prepared to deal with them, but I'd say the overwhelming majority certainly aren't prepared to deal with them.
Emeritus invited us to come to one of their facilities in San Diego. It has a memory care unit. Seniors can pay upwards of $5,000 a month to live in a place like this.
So we're in the memory care unit or memory care community.
We call it the memory care neighborhood.
Memory care neighborhood in Carmel Valley.
Kelly Scott runs Emeritus's memory care program.
So this is our program, we call it our Join Their Journey program, and this is where we're caring for folks with dementia. And it's really a specialized program to meet their needs. We find out a lot about who they are as individuals. And then the day is set up around what is purposeful and meaningful to them as individuals.
Get ready, 3:50.
But some question whether memory care units like this one provide enough care.
Has anyone got a shovel?
You're gonna have a memory care unit. That's a good marketing tool for families. A, there's demand and you're trying to keep occupancy up. And B, you can charge more for memory care. I mean, all you've really done is created rooms around a courtyard, but still, that's nice. And it's much safer. But then they say they've got staff who are trained to do memory care. And that's where it starts to kind of fall apart because the staff are generally not well trained to do dementia care.
And lay out for me, if we're here in Carmel Valley, we're at your facility, what would the typical training consist of for somebody in this facility?
Who's working particularly in memory care?
In the memory care.
Okay. For our staff that works in memory care, they're going to go through what we call general orientation, which everybody in the community would go through. And then we have an 8-hour class that's the Join Their Journey class. And that's really where we cover everything from disease process to how we serve a meal slightly differently to folks who have dementia, to how to engage, how to approach, how to communicate, overcoming some communication barriers at times.
So the 8-hour intro is sort of the minimum.
That's our company standard, is going to be the 8-hour.
8 hours? That's nothing. Who's going to explain this is what the disease is? This is the impact that it has on people's physical health and on their behaviors. You've got to know how to interpret nonverbal cues that something's going on with this resident because they can't tell you verbally, in the same way that a 2-year-old can't tell you or a 1-year-old. I mean, you've got to do a lot of training for memory care units. You can do great care. You got to know how.
I think the challenge for us.
For the past year, ProPublica and Frontline have been examining assisted living, and Emeritus, the industry's biggest chain, which is home to more than 40,000 seniors.
A resident was assaulted by another resident due to lack of care by facility, substantiated.
There's no national data on assisted living, so we focused on California, the state with the most assisted living facilities. During the last 3 years, Emeritus had more substantiated consumer complaints per bed than any of its major competitors.
Facility has insufficient staff to monitor residents.
We found authorities in other states have cited Emeritus for numerous legal violations, from a shortage of staff to taking in seniors too sick to legally live in their buildings.
Good. That one. At Oceanside. You just have somebody apparently falling out of the second-story window.
And we identified more than 24 questionable deaths, many of which have never been reported on.
So she froze to death.
She froze to death.
On Christmas Day.
On Christmas Day.
Her name was Mabel Austin, and she suffered from dementia. One night she wandered out of an Emeritus facility in Texas and froze to death. In Colorado, Herbert Packard was beaten to death by a resident with brain damage. In Massachusetts, Anjanette Stewart was repeatedly sexually assaulted An investigation found that emeritus workers knew about the attacks and didn't stop them. In Florida, Richard Borak, who had Alzheimer's, slipped out of a facility one day and was never seen again. When we asked emeritus to comment on these incidents, the company refused. But Granger Cobb did agree to comment generally on the problems we'd found at his company.
It's a fact of life, and it's not peculiar to assisted living versus any other business, but from time to time, human beings will make mistakes.
But some things are pretty cut and dry. In some states, if you have a particular condition, you can't be in a facility. In some states, if you are posing an immediate harm to yourself or others, you can't be in an assisted living facility. What are the risks of having somebody who has a prohibited condition, something that should keep them out of assisted living in this kind of environment?
Well, if we can't adequately care for the resident, we shouldn't have them. If we cannot care for them sufficiently, we will not jeopardize their health or their condition by keeping them in our community.
But in our reporting, we came across a revealing incident near Jackson, Mississippi. It involved a woman with dementia named Merle Fall. Merle went to live at Emeritus at Ridgeland Point at the end of a long, happy life.
She was a lot of fun to be around. Our friends all always loved her. She said whatever came to mind, and she was always the life of the party. You know, everybody always loved her.
In the early stages of her dementia, Merle lived with Diane's sister, Linda. But when Linda felt she could no longer keep Merle safe, the sisters called Emeritus. The company sent a nurse to evaluate Merle.
She came in, she sat down right there on the couch with Mother. Mother was sitting there too. She reached over and held Mother's hand. And she never asked any questions. As a matter of fact, it was only later that I understood she was here to evaluate Mother, to find out whether she was suitable for Ridgeland Point. Because all she did was talk about what a great experience it was going to be. Mother was going to get a lot of one-on-one attention. She said she's going to get so tired of seeing my face. We're going to take care of her just like she was our mother, is what they said.
And so Merle's daughters moved their mom in at a cost of about $3,500 a month.
She went in on Thursday afternoon, February 25th. They had suggested that we not come by for a few days to get her used to it. Sunday, I finally said we want to see her. We got there. She was drugged, drooling. We couldn't wake her up. She had on the same clothes she had on when we took her there Thursday. She smelled of urine. I mean, she looked like she'd just been drugged the whole time.
The sisters discussed taking Merle home, but in the end decided not to move her.
She was miserable where she was, and she wanted to go home. And it was really hard to leave her there. But we truly thought it was the best thing for her. We truly thought it was a way to keep her safe.
But just days later, Merle stuffed her clothes into a suitcase and told a caregiver that she was leaving. Soon after, she apparently pried open an upstairs window in the memory care unit and forced herself through it. Then she plunged to the ground.
I got a call on Saturday, March the 6th, 9 days after she was admitted there. About 10 to 8 that morning, said, the lady identified herself and said, your mother got out. I said, what do you mean she got out? She said, she went out the window. I said, she went out a second story window? And she said, yes. I said, is she breathing? Is she alive? She's on the ground crawling around. She won't get up.
We probably got there in less than 10 minutes. As a matter of fact, they were still putting her in the ambulance when we got there. There was not one living soul from Ridgeland Point out there with her. Nobody from Ridgeland Point ever came outside and said anything to us. Nobody expressed any regret because they never walked out the front door. We never saw them.
At the hospital, doctors discovered that Merle had bleeding in her brain. 3 days later, she died. Soon after, the sisters filed a lawsuit against Emeritus.
Some cynical people will say, Diane and Linda, they're suing because they want money. because they want to enrich themselves. They see a big corporation and they want some money. What do you say to that?
I'd say shut the facility down, put the people in jail, we drop the lawsuit. Because we don't have any, well, it's not the money. It's truly not the money. But the money is all that matters to Emeritus. And if that's all that matters to him, it's the only way to hurt him. And believe me, I want to hurt him.
The daughter's lawsuit against Emeritus is ongoing, but Mississippi regulators decided not to cite or fine Emeritus for Merle's death.
That was one where we actually followed our policies and procedures. They had checked all the windows in the community to make sure that none of them opened past 12 inches, which is the regulation in the state of Mississippi. But it's so difficult sometimes with our residents that may have some memory impairment. Sometimes their behavior is unpredictable and catches staff off guard, even when they think they're doing all the right things.
But Maggie Carter, who ran the memory care unit at the time and was later fired in a dispute with the company, told us that Merle's death reflected a bigger problem.
I think that they are bringing nursing home patients to a assisted living facility. Most patients that was in the wheelchairs or not able to assist themselves at all should have been in a nursing home, not assisted care.
Why do you think she was admitted?
At the time, this is my opinion, we was low on residents and we need to keep up our numbers. They was very strict about numbers, that we need to keep up our numbers. And at the time, memory care didn't have the capacity they wanted. So you still was under pressure to get people in that building. When you get them in that building, you was under pressure to keep them in that building at any cost.
Emeritus insists it only admits those who are medically suitable. But we talked to more than a dozen other former employees
Tell me what I should know.
who described a company focused on filling its buildings. And some said the company was willing to put seniors at risk to do it.
Okay.
Now, several former Emeritus employees have agreed to talk on camera for the first time.
It looks like a nice building on the outside, but inside, you know, everybody's just like scrambling to do the best they can, you know, to take care of all these people.
In 2007, Nurse Mary Kasuba was the resident care director at Emeritus at Emerald Hills in Northern California. She says the facility was so understaffed that it couldn't provide decent care for the roughly 80 seniors living there.
It was just very dysfunctional and not very organized, and the residents were not getting the care that they should be getting and getting the kind of care that they were paying for, because you know they paid quite a lot of money to be able to be in that facility.
Kasuba's biggest worry was the med room. It was managed by workers with little training who were paid around $10 an hour, like Jenny Hitt.
So for 80 or more residents, how many drugs are we talking about? I mean, how many prescriptions could you conceivably be dealing with?
Oh my goodness. Thousands. Some residents at one time can have 15 different prescriptions and different pills that they get. And some of them get pills 4 or 5, 6 times a day. There's times where I had to run down the hallways to make sure that this person is going to get their medication. And some of these medications are life or death.
Did you worry, hey, I've got an impossible task here. I could mess up and actually do something that leads to somebody's death?
All the time.
Mary Kasuba grew so concerned by the lack of staff, she sent a registered letter to corporate headquarters, saying that unless improvements were made, she would resign.
Since I came to work with Emerald Hills, there has not been enough staff to cover any part of the day-to-day staffing needs to give the residents their quality of care that Emerald Hills advertises in its information. Not enough in the kitchen, housekeeping, resident assistances, and med techs. My biggest concern is the med room. Staff that was in place before I was employed were placed in positions that are beyond their capacity. They have been placed in the med room without significant training and support for their position. A quick fix for a sinking ship.
So you send this letter, you send it to your boss at the facility, you send it to the executives in Seattle. Did any of them ever respond to you or address these concerns in any way?
No, nobody responded at all. The letters that I sent to the corporate offices, that I sent, return receipt requested, and I called and made telephone calls, nobody responded. Nobody.
And so Kasuba quit. The executive vice president for quality services at Emeritus is Buji Amparo.
A nurse named Mary Kasuba wrote you a letter. She was concerned that there weren't enough staff in the med room, that they didn't have enough training, that they weren't paid well enough, and that something bad could happen as a result.
Right. That building over time had many changes. I'm not gonna, deny that. Now with Ms. Kasuba's letter, it's just too unfortunate that she felt that way. We have a lot of platform that we have in place to allow our staff to express concern. We have this system called Ethics First, where it's a compliance line where you could call the 800 number and lodge your complaint. If you wanted to be anonymous, you can be anonymous.
Jenny Hitt says she called Ethics First multiple times about what was going on at Emerald Hills.
Somehow, they would find out that it was me, and I would get questioned. Why didn't you bring it to us? Don't call Ethics First.
So even though the company had an ethics hotline, what you're telling me is your bosses said, don't call the ethics hotline.
Well, in meetings and stuff, they were like, oh, you can always call ethics. But when it came down to you calling ethics and they found out you called ethics, it was a big deal. Because they were mad.
A big deal in a not good way.
No, not good way.
Eventually, Emeritus fired Jenny Hitt.
So the company says you made a medication error, that's why we fired you.
Yeah.
You don't buy that.
I don't buy it.
What do you think the real reason is?
Because I was causing too much trouble. I was calling ethics and corporate, and I was even talking to family members, be like, hey, your mom and dad aren't getting this. You need to get them out. And they didn't like that.
Even as Hitt and Nurse Kasuba were telling Emeritus the staff couldn't handle the workload, the company was trying to get more seniors in the building. Melissa Gracio was the lead salesperson.
The biggest thing I always heard was 100%, we need 100%, always, fill the building, 100%. It gave me a lot of anxiety because my philosophy wasn't to move in a warm body just to fill the building. My philosophy was to make sure it was the right fit with the person, the prospective resident moving in. And that is one thing that was hard for me, is because they wanted a hard close after every single person I met with.
Do you think the company ever moved in people who were not a good fit for the building, that they needed services the building couldn't provide?
I do.
Joan Boyce was one senior Gracio regrets moving in.
These photos are some of my favorites. Just this one of my mom. This was when she first came out here in the early 50s. Just kind of shows her kind of the carefree, and her adventurous spirit that, just to come out here as a single woman. But yeah, she was just free-spirited and confident. And I think that, throughout these decades of pictures here, I see that time and time again.
Then, when she was in her 70s, Joan began to show signs of dementia.
There are certain pictures where you can almost see it in her eyes, that something just wasn't quite right.
Joan's dementia grew much worse. She had trouble talking. She needed assistance walking, and she needed help eating. In 2007, her family moved her into a facility they were happy with, but it was a long drive. Emerald Hills was closed and promised great care. To be able to spend more time with Joan, they moved her. But some of the staff didn't think Emerald Hills could care for Joan.
She should never have came.
You don't think she should have been admitted to your facility?
Mm-mm.
Where do you think she should have gone?
Skilled nursing.
Why?
She couldn't walk. She couldn't feed herself. She barely even talked to us, and her health wasn't that good. And we told them she needs to go to skilled.
So you told the boss, Joan Boyce needs to go to a skilled nursing home.
Yeah.
What happened?
They said, we can take care of their needs. She doesn't need to move.
Eric Boyce's father spent part of every day with his wife. He began to worry that she wasn't getting the care she needed. He told his son,
My dad said, hey, they're not treating Mom well. And most of it I thought I dismissed. I wanted to believe that couldn't be happening. There was a good deal of denial.
but after 3 months at Emerald Hills, it was clear to everyone that Joan's health had declined dramatically. Finally, she was moved to a nursing home, and it was there that doctors discovered that Joan had an array of life-threatening wounds.
People that go, how would you not know that, your own mother, weren't you there? Yeah, my wife and I were there 4 to 5 times a week between the two of us. But we didn't make it a habit to strip my mom down. We didn't, most of the time she was in a bed, blankets, sheets up on her. I didn't pull the sheet, I sat with my mom, I held her hand. But yeah, I didn't take the sheets down and I didn't pull down her nightgown. And I didn't inspect. I never even thought. I never even, again, we were paying money to, number one, make sure that wasn't happening. And if it was, that we would know about it, that we would have been told that we could have done some things, that we could have gotten the proper medical care in there. And it was shown later that this was all covered up, that the people that did know were being told not to say anything.
On Valentine's Day, 2009, Joan Boyce died. The Boyce family decided to sue Emeritus and hired elder abuse attorney Leslie Clement.
This isn't just about Joan Boyce. This is about everyone who has Alzheimer's or dementia. This is about every senior who has any type of physical disability and is dependent on staff for help. Joan Boyce was not unique. Joan Boyce is typical of the resident population in assisted living today. This is the population that they're marketing for. This is the population they're going after. This is the population that's going to make them a lot of money.
Clement subpoenaed thousands of pages of documents from Emeritus headquarters in Seattle. She says one of those documents proves that Emeritus ordered facilities to target seriously ill seniors, such as those with advanced dementia, because they could be charged more.
Everything I look at a corporate level, all of their records, it's all about a push for more money to increase the cash flow, and there's no talk about caring for the elderly. I mean, when you read their records, you think that this is a real estate company.
Clement uncovered evidence that at the same time it was targeting seriously ill seniors, Emeritus was failing to hire or train enough staff to care for them.
The law in California says you have to have enough staff to meet the needs of your residents, each resident in your building. And it has to be enough in number and competency. And there's training that's required. And when I looked into, subpoenaed all of the personnel files for the caregivers, I found over and over and over again they did not have the state required mandated training. They didn't have the Emeritus required training. Not only did the caregivers not have it, the directors didn't have it.
Is it any surprise to you that with the staffing that Emeritus had in this building, that Mrs. Boyce ended up falling?
Clement took what she'd uncovered and used it to confront numerous current and former Emeritus executives under oath.
It is horrible to hear that.
Catherine Rattel was a vice president of operations at Emeritus.
When you were the VPO at Emeritus, did you have an understanding as to what educational background you expected of your memory care unit directors? I don't recall what the expectation is. How about experience? Did you have an expectation as the VPO as to what the experience level would be of the memory care director. I don't recall what it was.
Alicia Parga, the memory care director at Emerald Hills, was on the job for 18 months without the legally required dementia training.
Did you feel oftentimes that you just did not have the training that you needed to do that job as a memory care unit director?
Flex Foundation only broad.
Yes. They were constantly being told to cut labor expense, cut labor, cut labor, cut labor. A staff.
Susan Rotella was one of the top 3 emeritus executives in California. She said facility directors felt that they didn't have enough staff to care for their residents.
So there was a lot of frustration around just these kind of, directions from corporate that said, cut labor by 10%.
Rotella said she asked her bosses why they didn't use a staff to resident ratio. Other companies used them to ensure quality care.
And who or whom from the senior executive team responded?
Uji Amparo, our executive vice president of quality.
He got very agitated. And he jumped up and he said, we don't use staffing ratios because if we did not have the right amount of staffing in place and a resident issue occurred or incident, negative resident issue or incident occurred, and we didn't have the right staffing, we could be sued.
Rotella said she immediately felt blowback from her question.
All of a sudden I went from being everyone's best friend to a troubled child because I was bringing up labor standards in this meeting.
Soon after, Rotella was fired.
And what reason did they give you for your termination, if you recall?
I was not a fit.
Rotella is suing Emeritus for wrongful termination. At the same time, employees at Emerald Hills were complaining to their superiors about a shortage of staff. They were reporting that dozens of seniors were falling. Some of the residents were hospitalized for broken bones and other injuries.
Then look at this one, 3rd fall within 10 days. Look at the time. A lot of these things seem to happen when there's not a lot of staff on duty.
Right.
One person who fell was Joan Boyce.
She was there 10 days, and she had a fall, and she was found face down on the floor. She was taken to the hospital alone. This woman suffered from dementia. They didn't have enough caregiving staff to put someone in the ambulance with her that could be her voice and talk for her at the hospital. She comes back, that's it. She's put in bed, she's put in a wheelchair. She doesn't move anymore. And that's what starts her breakdown. She was in a fetal position. She wasn't bathed. She had 8 different areas of skin damage. Pressure ulcers, dead skin that goes through muscle, tissue. You can see into her body.
After consulting with a doctor, Clement concluded the pressure sores led to Joan's death. Under state law, seniors with wounds this serious are not allowed to remain in assisted living. But Joan stayed at Emerald Hills for weeks with these sores. Jenny Hitt testified that she tried to treat the wounds herself, even though she knew she wasn't qualified to. She said her boss told her, "Just don't let anybody know." Clement also discovered that it was an emeritus policy to keep the back door shut. Lisa Paglia, a former regional manager, testified about what that meant.
What did you understand? Keep that back door closed. Don't let anybody move out unless they were deceased.
But Emeritus CEO Granger Cobb, testifying under oath, disputed that description of the back door policy.
What does that term mean?
It refers to trying to do everything we can in situations where residents want to stay with us, family want their loved one to stay with us, to be able to keep them. Families usually want their loved ones to stay with us as long as possible, as opposed to skilled nursing, very institutional environment. And so we try to work with the families and do all we can to accommodate that.
In the Boyce case, lawyers for Emeritus offered a completely different characterization of the care Joan received and why she died.
The care providers who were providing the care made it pretty clear that they worked very hard to take care of Joan Boyce. We had testimony from witnesses who said they observed, outside witnesses, they observed the care staff spending hours with Mrs. Boyce, taking care of her, repositioning her, keeping her clean. So the evidence dictated against Mrs. Boyce being neglected. I can understand how a family could be angry about what's happening to their loved one. That's real. Where we go wrong is when we take that anger that that family has and that grief and that suffering, and we direct it to the people who were there for the resident. They're not the evil. It's the diseases of aging that are the evil.
It was Alzheimer's and a series of strokes that led to Joan's death, according to Dr. Richard Tyndall, an expert witness for Emeritus.
The bed sores, to keep it high, did not contribute to her death. Okay, she's having more and more difficulty walking and moving. She doesn't want to get up on her leg. They interpret it as a problem with the foot. In reality, it's paralysis of the leg. This is a stroke syndrome. She died because of her Alzheimer's and stroke, leading to a bedridden status, an inability to take adequate nutrition and hydration, progressive dehydration, malnutrition, which then you stop breathing and you die. And that is, in fact, in a hospice situation, how Alzheimer's patients and severe stroke patients die.
To counter the Emeritus case, Clement tapped one of the country's leading forensic geriatricians.
The key record in this particular case is the description of the pressure ulcers that she acquired at Emeritus. We have photographic evidence and we have measurements taken at the nursing home where she went. We have a very complete description of what her condition was like when she left Emeritus. We also have some records from before she went to Emeritus. If you didn't know anything about Emeritus or the facility, and you would look at the condition when she went in and the condition when she left, you would say, wow, what happened to her? Something, really bad must have happened to her. Then you look at the operation of the facility and you say, it's neglected. That's how she ended up like that.
And you think that neglect stems from there being not enough trained staff?
Exactly. Not enough staff. So no one can help her walk to keep her walking. And if you don't help her move, she's going to get a pressure injury to her skin. So those things all should have been done. Instead, nothing was done.
Deep into the litigation, Emeritus offered to settle the case.
So the company came to us and offered us $3.3 million to walk away, to turn our back and not say any more about this case.
They offered you $3 million?
Over three, yeah. And so, and that a substantial amount of money, but that also came with basically a gag order, an order that we wouldn't have been able to talk. We would not have been able to share my mom's story. They wanted us to turn over all of our investigative, everything, and they knew that we had a lot of stuff that had been uncovered. And they wanted all that. They wanted it all to be shredded, all to be destroyed. That was part of the bargain for the money. And we weren't willing to do that.
Emeritus says it never told the family it would shred the documents, and that any offer it made was not an admission of wrongdoing. And so the trial went on. And on March 5th, 2013, all 12 jurors found the Emeritus Corporation liable for recklessness, oppression, and fraud in the wrongful death of Joan Boyce. And they ruled that Emeritus executives were well aware of the unfitness of their employees. The jury awarded punitive damages of nearly $23 million. The amount came from combining Granger Cobb's annual compensation with that of the company's chairman. And the 81 cents? That was to remind Emeritus of Joan's age.
It's a huge number. It's a devastating number. but I think it's just a function of the size of my client. I think they're in some ways a victim of their success and growth. And it's unfortunate that because they're large, that the verdict therefore is large.
You know, somebody last weekend, I was with some friends and they said, aren't you just ecstatic? Aren't you just so overjoyed with this verdict? And I don't think he thought it was as deep, but for me, I had to sit back. I had to stand back from that question. I had to look and I go, and my honest answer was, I'm not as overjoyed as I thought I would be. And he was like, and the guys that I was with were like, what? Technically, yeah, we won and Emeritus lost. But to me, it's bigger than that. It's more about right and wrong. And I don't feel that with this loss, Emeritus is doing anything different. I honestly don't think they've changed their practice, their business as usual.
We asked Emeritus executives to comment on camera, but they declined. Instead, they responded in writing.
We were extremely disappointed that this jury found our care of Mrs. Boyce unsatisfactory, and we adamantly disagree with the outcome of this trial. Our dedicated and hardworking caregivers provided her with quality care during the 3 months she lived with us.
The company also wrote that its violations have trended down significantly over the last 5 years, and Emeritus said it is appealing the jury award. But in response to its initial motion, the judge ruled the Boyce family had proven their case and denied the company's request to reduce the award.
I would say that today, one of the few remedies that consumers have with regard to assisted living are lawsuits. And that's what we see. And that's unfortunate because the industry is always complaining, oh, there's too many lawsuits and they're frivolous, etc. I'm shocked that there aren't more, to tell you the truth. When you have a regulatory system that's not doing its job, when you have people who are filing complaints and you might as well file those complaints down a black hole, that's what's going to happen. It's just a horrible system right now.
The head of a state licensing agency told me assisted living is the rock we don't want to look under. They know there's a problem, but they don't have the resources. I mean, when it's nursing homes, we have federal support for a huge amount of the surveys and inspections and complaint investigations that they do, and for the training that the surveyors get. None of that exists for inspection and regulation of assisted living. None of it. We're creating an industry with 1 million people in it who are becoming more frail, who are poorly regulated by the state. I mean, that's why I talk about it as a ticking time bomb, because we're going to see more deaths, more injuries, and families are going to be so shocked because they think they've made a good decision. They think they've made a safe decision.
I have dreams, I guess they border on nightmares, that my mom is with me and she's lucid for a moment. You know, and I basically use that time to apologize to her for not being the voice that she needed, for not demanding more of the people that we trusted with her care. But that's a fairly common dream that I have.
Go to pbs.org/frontline for more on what questions to ask when searching for an assisted living facility. Explore additional reporting on the industry from our partners at ProPublica. Learn about the debate in Washington over regulating senior care. Plus, plus read our extended interviews with Emeritus CEO Granger Cobb
Human beings will make mistakes.
and others.
A horrible system right now.
Follow Frontline on Facebook and Twitter or pbs.org/frontline. For more on this and other Frontline programs,
Well, did you think it was worthwhile watching this? Yes? No? Half asleep or what? First of all, this is what is called investigative journalism. You see the amount of work they have to put in to produce a documentary, a story that has some social impact. You get to know at least the American situation, that it is not as rosy, it's not as clean, it's not as good looking as what a building may look from the outside. Even in Sri Lanka now, this whole industry is growing without any regulation, very minimal. And our mentality, the Sri Lankan mentality, is that we are more believers in fate. We accept certain outcomes as acceptable. Whereas the American public is not that easy to satisfy. They want to know why. And you saw the impact of money. But you also saw that some of the people were not interested in money. They were interested in defining what is right or wrong, or good or bad. And it's not really the matter. So it's a tough area. You folks are, it's probably somewhere between 20 and 30 or so. I'm entering the dementia age. And according to my wife, she thought I was suffering from dementia about 10 years ago. So we will also get there. And Sri Lanka has the highest age population in Southeast Asia at the moment. We are running about 13 to 14%. So, in terms of proportion, although it's 13% in terms of numbers, it's not like in the United States. We have fewer numbers. So, there is ample room for the industry to grow and accommodate people. In fact, I have been consulted by many people, business people, who want to set up homes for the aged, or say aged care facilities or assisted living facilities. And their approach, their initial approach is all, it's a business model. It's a business model. We have so many beds, we have so many people coming there, or so many rooms, so many people coming in there. This is what our income is going to be, and this is how we're going to do this, that, and the other, and we are going to have this amount of profit. It just so happens that that the business model looks very nice, but then when you start looking into what kind of corners they are going to cut and save money, then it becomes kind of unethical. And I have to kind of give them advice, saying, look, I don't think you should be doing this. I don't think you should be doing this. They concern. Because I brought up to something. They were expecting me not to bring up this. But I said, no, you can't do it. Not do it. So they themselves knew that they were doing something unethical or were planning to do something. And in a way they were right. They were trying to find out what the situation was. So getting an opinion from me and from some other people, that was perfectly all right. But they were finding it hard to reconcile, finding it hard to make the picture ethical and yet have a profit. I think a profit is perfectly fine thing as long as the profit was made ethical. Okay. Let's take a break for about 10 minutes or so. We'll come back up. Bye. Yeah. Now I want to get some feedback. It was a 55-minute documentary. Did you think it was worthwhile spending that amount of time learning about the different issues? Did you folks think that there was this kind of situation happening? Did you know that? You knew that? You knew that? Did everybody know that? You are thinking about in Sri Lanka or you're talking about abroad? Huh? All over. All right, good, good. I'm sorry that I may have bored you with this because if it comes of no help, I don't want to do it in the future. But I feel that every time I watch this, I learn so much. I myself learn so much. See, the number of concepts, number of ideas, number of viewpoints that come into this business of taking care of the elderly, especially if the demand is very grateful. The demand is very grateful. Now, was the kind of language they used and the speed at which they were talking, was it okay? It's not like they had a funny American accent that you couldn't understand what they were saying kind of thing. No, good. Digestible. That's good. Very good. Now, you can go onto that same site. It's called PBS Frontline. PBS Frontline. You can go on the YouTube and you can get access to it. They have related documentaries. One about end of life issues. What happens when it seems more or less certain that despite whatever you may do, it's time for somebody to go. what are the issues revolving around that? One of the best businesses in town is to cater to the men. We have Raymond and Daratnet and Mindway and all that, very stable business. I'll tell you a little story. IIHS is going to commemorate 15 years next month. And when we look back and how we started in 2002, there was a lady from California called Dr. Julia Pierce. She has a PhD in nursing, and she was the dean and also the chairperson of the School of Nursing at a university called Pacific Union College, a very old, one of the first nursing schools in the United States. She came to Sri Lanka to help us start IIHS. She is what I would call a very typical middle-class American person. Well-balanced, well-informed, well-educated, with a good sense of values. Every year I go to the United States about once or twice. Every year I go and visit her. So I'm watching her getting old from 15 years ago to today. Obviously she's watching me getting old too. So I comment about her changes and she comments about my changes. And we all don't want to admit sometimes that we're getting old. And, oh, Julia, you're looking good, you're looking young. She knows I'm not telling the truth. But that's probably has what we call small talk. Some people age slowly, some people age fast. We can't control it, I guess, but then that's what happens. Now I'm really going to talk about my husband. Husband is also what I would call a typical, what we call old-fashioned American. He's huge. And about 68 years ago or so, 60 or 70 years ago, they decided to build their own house. No contractors and subcontractors and all these things. The university itself was in a country setting. It's like when they started California University. There's mountains, a lot of trees and all that. This guy, he cut the trees down himself. He dug the rocks out. He did the foundation all by himself, like a hobby. Huge stuff. And he's got his own peculiar style. When I say peculiar, it's not dangerous in any way. He doesn't like to meet people other than his own family. For example, his wife's family, Julia's family, he meets them and all of that, but she's not keen. He likes to be left alone. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink. They belong to a Christian sect called the Seventh-day Adventists. And I met him for the first time about maybe about 12 years ago. And Julia writes to me after that. Dr. Nihal, something funny has happened to the husband's name. She calls him Chuck. Something's funny. Chuck. You know, he seems to like you. I thought, and there are other Sri Lankan people also who go and visit them. But she said, no, he seems to like you more than anybody else. She said, I don't understand why. I said, I don't know the guy, so I don't know how to comment. I said, but it's nice to know that he likes me. So, and he's getting old. He's 10 years older than she is. And so he's afraid. So now imagine he's getting his cold and his head. She can't do much for him. If he falls, she can't lift him. In fact, in the United States, there is a service. And it's called fall down service. Sometimes you slip in the bathroom and you fall, or fall in the dining hall or whatever, and you can't get up. You call, there's a certain telephone number, fire department, you call them and saying, oh, can you please come to this address? My husband has fallen and he can't get up. So they come and they lift the guy up and then, okay, thank you very much. There they go. That's a service that they provide. Okay. So Chuck has used the service many times. If she falls on Julia, she'll get pinned and she'll die. It's that hefty man. And I was there about 5 months ago. They started talking about assisted living. He was saying, no, I'm not going to leave my house. Doesn't matter what happens, I'm not going to leave this house. I built this house, I love this house, I want to die in this house, I don't want to get out. But he's having too many faults. And he also has got a few other illnesses. And he's a rough American fellow. Rough means he's not violent. Sometimes unrefined, or you might say crude, or whatever, but he is not trying to be that. That's his language, that's his style. And so now he's having problems passing urine because he's got prostate hypertrophy. And so now they're trying to get nursing coverage for him at home. Not nursing coverage really, but personal caregiving coverage. Going to be paid by the state of California. If you are over the age of 85 or something, they pay for that service. So somebody will come and be with you for maybe 12 hours, and then at night sometimes they have a person stay there too. So it just so happens that they keep you evaluating on the day that I visited them. Now he waits for my visit, according to Julie. He knows that you're coming. The guy is all excited, he doesn't have any other excitement at home, So, and I tell him, oh, Dr. Nihal is coming. He is all excited. So what I do is I take them out to dinner. To lunch. And now he has lived in that town for a long time. But now he can't even get out of the car easily. And there is a favorite restaurant, hamburger restaurant in the middle of the main street of the town. Kind of a posh town, rich town. And both of them are old and they prefer not to drive, although she can. So I take them in my car. And if you're not used to getting in and out of a car, it's even my car right now. I mean, I know how to get in and out, but I noticed that some other people they take a long time to get in and out because they're not used to it. I learned a lot about the man. Now we were going to go and have his favorite hamburger. Now this place has all kinds of food, starting from maybe like $6 all the way up to about $20. He always takes $6. I don't want anybody to make money off of me. I'll go for the cheapest. That's his style. So I drive the car and Julius is stop in front of this restaurant. Because then we'll go and park in the back and come back. Parking is difficult. I am not a known face in the town. So I drive and I stop in front of the thing, and there's a big sign saying no stopping on the road. We block the traffic. Now I stop the car, and then behind me there are other fellows who are coming, and now they are impatient that I am not moving. And so open the door. He can't even open the door. He's so big. He barely fits into the front seat of the car. He can't move and press the button and all this stuff. So I get out and go out and try to open the door. Cars are backing up there. Within seconds, the police come. The police come and they see me. They say, yeah, this guy looks strange. He's not from town. And they say, Chuck. Chuck has seen these policemen from the time that they were little boys, you see. They take over. They go to the middle of the road and they stop the traffic. All for Chuck. And the authority. All for Chuck. We got to the I was really amazed. So now I have no parking problem. I go there and take the last time I went, a couple of nurses came. So now I'm sitting there. Now I'm also learning about how these people come to evaluate. They come with all these forms of various other things. And he's sitting there and he's getting questioned. And he's making his comments. He's making his comments to me. Or he says things like, yeah, these young girls, what do they know? They're coming to assess me. How can they do that? They are so young, they don't know that thing. And these are nurses who are about probably age 40, 45 kind of thing. No? Yeah, well-educated people. So they also know this guy is old and maybe partly demented and he's got a certain look, I don't care what you do to me. I don't want you to probe into my private parts. Like everybody believes. But I tell you, they are yet working. But sometimes I use a little bit of control. But Julia will fix it for me, so don't worry. Don't come and bother with me about my privates. And then he's saying, you know what these guys are here for? I'm old, I'm going to die. They're trying to make money off of me. They're going to come here twice a day or whatever and they're going to get paid for looking after me. I don't want people to make money off of me. So now they go into the section of what happens when he dies. They have to get his permission. Which undertaker to go to, and what kind of coffin he wants, whether he wants church service or this or that. He's so practical. And he calls the nurses chicks sometimes, or calls them gals, sometimes calls them nurses. You folks, the nurses, huh? Oh, you're like my wife then, huh? She says, look honey, I'm dead. So what is this doing? Just do what you want. I don't want any ceremony. But I don't want the undertaker to make money off of me. You know, it's so humorous the way he says it. He says, I want to be disposed, not don't let anybody make money off of me. So I don't want to agree to that. I want to make sure that it's written there on that paper. So find the cheapest fellow and get the cheapest box. And he said, do you want to have a burial or cremation? I he's a little bit like, what's the difference? I'm dead. What's the difference? So Julia says, oh, you know, honey, burial means like what happened to uncle so and so, and what happened to like uncle so and so, that is the burial. If not, we cremate you, and then the nurse says, now what do you do with the ashes? Mr. Pierce, what shall we do with the ashes? Oh, if you like it, can keep it. And then Julia says, honey, I'll keep them. For what? For what? So everybody laughs. He's got his own ideas. No, I'm dead, I'm gone. Ashes, who the hell cares what happens? And she said, you know, I think I'll save them, and then when I am also cremated, then my ashes, we'll have somebody mix the ashes together and, you know, go and throw it into the river. Don't tell me, I'm dead. I don't know any of that stuff. But make sure nobody makes money off of it. Undertaker is a good business because people make money. In fact, Chuck knows the undertakers too. And he says, oh, that guy, Somapal, I don't like him. No. I know how we played out that old lady. I know how we did that. No. I don't want him to touch my money. No. I don't want him to make money. I know he'll make money off of me. I don't want to do that. So we'll go with Somapal, we'll go with Hemapal. Oh, yeah, he's very good. He's a little bit back. Yeah, his wife is very pretty. Yeah, I don't mind it. That kind of stuff. So, you know, being old, you begin to have this, you know, word of your own. That's part of dementia. Okay? So, I'm sorry that was a diversion because the man died about a month. He died about a month. He died in his sleep, so he didn't fall and break a bone or anything like that. We were going to have Dr. Pierce come to Sri Lanka for our celebrations next month, but unfortunately she's too old and feeble to travel, so she won't be coming. All right, now let's go over all these different things that we saw on the movie. The practical aspects of what happens when you have to look after somebody. Now, here are the different issues that we have to look at. Now, the aging population, we talked enough about that, we all know that, okay? So the next thing is that to support the older people, we need to have a younger generation that can support them. They need to be employed, they need to be contributing money in some way to the government, for the government to support the older people. So that's where taxation comes in a little bit, okay? How the taxes that you pay help to look after the older people. And in some countries, the taxes are very high.
because they provide good service. The Scandinavian countries are very famous for that. All of them pay a lot in income taxes, sometimes 70%, 80%, but they get excellent service. They get very good service. Medical services, assisted living services, health, education, very good services, okay? So now, the money that is needed for looking after the aged people, it could be either private, or it could be government, or it can be a combination. And I've put the word employer there, okay? If you are working for an established company, they have various plans, retirement plans. So this refers to people who have a job with a company, and in a country like America, all companies, registered companies, have to have a certain amount of retirement benefit packages. So you contribute something while you're young, so that that money will be given back to you when you're old, okay? Now that is the money itself. Now who provides the services? That also can be either government or it can be private. When you say government, it can take a lot of different forms. Like in the United States, the government itself does not provide the service. The service is done by a private company kind of thing. However, the government will just give the money to the private people. The government will not set the rules and regulations and all of that. Although the government is paying for it, the service itself is not provided by the government or government employees. It's provided by private organizations. Private means everything is private, like what you saw in the movie. Okay? That company is a for-profit, emeritus, whatever it was for-profit company. Their bottom line is, we want to make a profit. That's it. Now comes the next thing about the services, the quality of the services. You can get a wide range from very low to very high. So that will depend on how much you can afford. And it also depends on your expectations. And if you are sometimes demented, you don't have any of those parameters or ideas, because your mind is not there. Okay? So somebody else has to define that for you. Like what you saw in the movie, the family said, oh, we will go and put father into this place because, oh, the garden is nice, or the room is nice, and this and that. But father himself may not know what it is all about. So the family is doing it out of a sense of obligation, maybe, or love, maybe, or whatever their feelings are. Okay? So depending on the money you have, you might choose the best, thinking that you're going to get the best, but that may not necessarily be so. And you saw on this documentary that sometimes things are not what they seem to be. There's a lot of fraud going on, or misrepresentation. Okay. And next comes standardization of services. You saw in this movie, on this documentary also, some of the workers. These workers are trying to make an honest living. They get hired by this company, and pretty soon they find out, these guys are doing bad things. And we are supposed to be their employees. We can't handle it. It doesn't agree with their conscience. So they make complaints. Obviously, if they complain to their superior, they'll be kicked out of the job. They lose income. That's difficult for them also. So this business of trying to maintain good quality is a very difficult area unless there is a regulatory agency, some kind of authority that says, okay, the person has to have their teeth brushed after every meal. They should have a bath at least once a day. They should be taken for a walk for 5 minutes every day, something like that. Those rules and regulations have to be there, not on paper, but they have to be enforced. And if you begin to cut corners and cheat, that's when the whole operation becomes unethical. Okay? And that may increase your profits, but that's not clean money. That's not a clean profit. Okay? All right? So having an environment that enforces the regulations is very important. And the regulations are necessary to maintain basic or decent standards of service. Now, in some countries, there are government agencies or even private agencies. Their sole job is just to visit these homes at random and surprise them with a visit and see what is happening. Are they carrying out their own rules and regulations? Or what do these inspectors notice? Now in Sri Lanka we have, at least in Colombo, they have the public health inspectors. They go and check restaurants out, and they go and check some drains and other places where water is not flowing properly, and things like that, mosquito control and all that. So they have similar things to police the services to see whether they are carrying out what is supposed to be done, and it has to be done very objectively. So they have certain things they have to measure. Objective assessment, not just looking, oh, that looks nice, that looks nice. No. They ask pointed questions and make sure that certain standards are met. Now, on top of all of this, people come from a family. Not all of them have family after a certain age. The family has either neglected them, or the family has put them into this retirement, this assisted living thing, and the family doesn't come back to visit them, except maybe Christmas or New Year or something like that. But they may not have regular family contact. That depends on the family. So if you have some family people around you, okay, then you will have a lot of cultural and religious influences that will play a part in this assisted living facility. You might want to go and sing some hymns, or chant some pirit, or do some kind of a religious ritual, trying to make the old person happy. So that should not be neglected. It should be promoted. Okay. Now, social involvement and empowerment. Remember when we studied about HelpAge and their Age Watch Index? One of the things about aging that they measured was empowerment. After you retire from working as a teacher or doctor or nurse or engine driver or whatever, after you finish your job and you kind of stay at home, how does society help you? Do they help you in a way that, kind of promotes good health, that promotes good mental health, that promotes involvement, so that your experiences in life, can be taught to the younger generation or to another generation that's behind you. Your experience should not be allowed to, rust, to fade away. It should be mobilized, it should be used to help the next generation. So, now, take my case, okay, I'm now 74. I remember my father, he died pretty young, but after he got sick, he was basically bedridden and he had no way to teach anybody a lot of the stuff that he knew. And I know my father knew a lot, but nobody could benefit from him except just like me, right? But not the neighbors, not the people in the church or in the temple or whatever. He had no platform to go and contribute what he had learned, okay? Now at 74, I feel very proud that I'm talking to people and at least they're paying good money and coming to listen to me. I'm not making money as such, but I feel so good that I'm promoting something, conversation or listening skills or providing information and things like that. So it's very important that social involvement and empowerment be maintained. Okay, then what we got after that? Okay. Human resources. When we provide services, we need adequate staff. That's what's called human resources. And there are different levels of human resources. And although we think that our managers are very important and, CEO is very important, my personal belief is that everybody is important. And I don't like the word minus staff. I know what it means. I don't think it means anything bad. But, you kind of create the impression that, their work is not important. Or the other fellow's work, the manager, is more important. I think they are all important. I think they are very important. Okay. The person who brings you your tea at 10 o'clock to the manager's office, okay, that's a very important job. A very important job. Okay. And you should not be thinking that they are minor stuff. They should be made to feel a member of the bigger family. And it's like in a family, if there are 7 or 8 children, you can't play favorites. It doesn't work. You may think that so and so is your favorite son, but if you make too obvious a show of it, it causes a lot of disruption in the family. Okay? So even in a workplace, the human resources is a very, very important component. Now, one of the things that you have to do is to look after the human resources, and you have to maintain their standards. You have to maintain their education. That has to be built in to the system. They have to be taught the newer methods of, let's say, first aid, or newer methods of disinfection, maybe the latest in terms of nutrition or whatever. You have to have continuing professional education. And so somebody has to keep a log of all of that. That has to be recorded, because in some countries, you have to submit that at the end of the year, or maybe at the end of every 2 years, to get your license to be in that job. Because some of these jobs are licensed. A doctor, a nurse, some special skilled nurses, they have to have licenses. And to maintain your license, you have to show that you have studied. And there are different ways they can measure that. Okay, so your boss has to have a program so that you have given adequate time for study. Maybe 2 hours a week or 1 hour a week, you have to do a certain module or read a book or whatever to maintain your standards, okay, to maintain quality. Okay. Now, physical plant. In the United States, around about 1970, let's see, when was it? About 75, they introduced a new law, a federal law. It was called the Disabilities Act. The whole country had to modify their buildings, their vehicles, parking lots to accommodate the disabled. And if you violate that, you get severely punished, major punishment. And now it is accepted. So all the new buildings that are built, they have, handles to hold on to on the wall, and they got ramps up which you can push your wheelchair, and the buttons in the elevators and all that have to be of a certain height so that you can do it easily, and they have to be in large print, and the colors should be such that it's easy to understand. This is all catering to the disabled. Imagine having to do that to the bus service, but in the United States, that's what it is. Okay. To get in and out of the bus, you should be able to make the bus in such a way that you can push your wheelchair in there. So they have a little platform that comes down, you push your wheelchair onto it, and then it goes up and takes you in. All the buses have to have that. Major cost at the very beginning, major cost. Okay. I was in private practice at the time, and I was in a building that had been completed about maybe 4 years before under the previous rules. All of a sudden they came and said, hey, you have to modify your bathrooms to accommodate disabled people. Ooh, that was such a big cost, but that's the rules. Airplanes, everything had to accommodate the disabled. Now that is where federal law is very powerful, very, very powerful. Okay? Because if you leave it to the private sector, it probably won't happen. And this student I said who wrote a very nice paper on barriers, one of the things that he has focused on is the problems related to travel. Travel means not only traveling in a vehicle, but like after you get off the vehicle, how do you get to the counter? How do you get to wherever? Are the signs adequate? Are they illuminated at night? Is it written in all 3 languages? All these little things that we don't necessarily think about. They are all related to the structure of the building, and that is called the physical plant. The structure of the building is called the physical plant. Okay, user-friendly architecture. Okay, it has to be also friendly for maintenance, the people who have to go and clean it. Okay, and it also sets the image of the place. It looks clean. It looks healthy. It looks attractive. Whereas if it doesn't look good, even though maybe the people working inside are very clever and very nice and very well informed and all that, if the building doesn't have good appeal, then you get turned off right at the very beginning. Okay. All right. Supply chain, dietary, janitorial, security. Now these are the areas that are sometimes not seen. They are not seen by the older person, they are not seen by the family, because these are things that happen behind the scenes somewhere. All the material that you need to keep the place clean, the brushes, the soap, the mops, the water, the buckets, they're all hidden somewhere. We don't see them. See what happened to that gentleman in the movie? He went and he opened a bottle of soap and drank it, some detergent. Of course, he's demented, so he didn't know what he was doing. He must have thought he was going to have some orange juice or something like that and just drank it. So those things have to be looked at very carefully and kept under lock and key, and that's what they call hazmat, hazardous materials. Hazardous materials called hazmat. You have to have special locks and keys, and only certain people should be given access to that. Okay, that's very important. The janitorial staff is so important. They are the ones who keep the place looking nice and neat. They are not minor staff. They are very important people. But sometimes maybe we don't respect them enough. That's not good. They are part of the team. They are part of the team. Okay. Transport services. All facilities caring for the elderly should have adequate methods of transport within the building and also to go out. They should have ambulances and certain vehicles built in certain ways so that loading and unloading is easy. Okay. And they should be able to be driven or manipulated or whatever 24 hours a day. So you have to have maintenance staff for that, and you have to have people who people who maintain those services. They have to be trained. They have to have classes. They have to have what they call dry runs or exercises, okay, once in a while to see whether the machine works, whether people know how to lift, how to carry, how to transport, kind of thing. So those also have to be kind of looked at by the managerial level staff. Okay. Now, this is the big thing. Medical support services. If you are growing old healthily, that's fine, very nice. But the moment you begin to have a problem, then you have to have medical support services. Now, as you saw in the documentary, if you fail to recognize people having problems and therefore by default that person gets neglected, so their medical condition will only get worse. When it becomes a crisis, everybody will be very excited about it, but if you were not alert to pick up the problem early on and provide the regular or required service. Now, learning how to pick up these things is a skill. So the staff has to observe and notice these things, like cuts and bruises and wounds and dislocations and things like that have to be observed by somebody and reported to somebody, and some action be taken by somebody. So there's a chain of events that follows. Okay. Now, our documentary today was all about the facilities not having the required services for that level of like aging. Age plus maybe diabetes or high blood pressure, maybe recovering from a stroke. Those people maybe should not be in a regular home for the aged. They should be what they call in a nursing facility, skilled nursing facility. And the documentary today was that the skilled nursing facilities have federal regulations or state regulations, whereas elderly care or assisted living does not have any regulations. So you can kind of fudge, you can kind of abuse the situation to your advantage and tell the family, oh, we'll take care of him, don't worry, his high blood pressure is not a big issue, we got a good nurse and all that, which is like wrong. Okay? Now we come to workplace issues that in some countries are managed through what are called labor unions. Labor unions. But in some countries there are no unions. Americans by and large don't like labor unions. But other countries like Sri Lanka and even the British, they are heavily into labor unions. So the labor unions are supposed to look after quality and various other benefits for the workers. So they will look into things like, are you overworked? Have you kind of got burnt out because you overworked? Is there a lot of politics in the workplace? Violence, unprofessional conduct, sexual harassment, all kinds of different things that can happen in the workforce. Being that you're providing services to the elderly and maybe partly demented people, they can't see any of this. So it is a very fertile area for workplace abuse. I'm not talking about abuse of the individual who's sick, I'm talking about the workforce itself. There are lots of things that happen there. Now, if you are working for a private company, or maybe even for the government, as a worker, you have certain rights. You can't be abused. You can't be told to lift 150 pounds, but maybe the law says you can lift up to 50 pounds. So they can't overload you. Okay. And if they do, you can kind of be, I don't want to say, you don't need to be rewarded, but you need to be able to work comfortably without it affecting your health. Now, I think all of you must have traveled abroad and packed your suitcases and take them to the airport. Airline company says each bag should weigh so many kilos. Okay. And if you watch the people at the airport, they weigh your bags. And if you are overweight by 1 or 2 pounds, they'll probably charge you some extra money. But they weigh that not because it's eventually going to increase the weight of the airplane, but the workers' union has said we can't be lifting, these 25 kilo suitcases, 200 times a day. It's going to break our back. So they have to set the limits on how heavy a bag should be. Those are rights that you have, that you are not supposed to do more than what you are capable of. Okay? Capable of not only physically, but even intellectually. Like you saw those nurses, there were nurses who were not trained in giving medicine, who were giving medicine. That's not right. Okay, so the workers, that lady in the picture in the documentary, she complained saying, I'm not trained to do this. She has a right to do that, but the moment she says that, she gets punished. So these are the issues that you have to be careful about or aware of. Okay, and then the patients themselves, they have more rights than you and me, because they're supposed to be old, they're supposed to be disabled, they're supposed to be, shown compassion. Okay, you have to make sure that you don't break or abuse patients' rights. The next related subject is elder abuse. Make sure that the elderly are not abused because they are vulnerable and because they can't object. A lot of things can happen. They can steal from the elderly people, they can sexually abuse them, they can deprive them, even of their food. Or give them only half and you eat the other half or something like that. These things can happen. Okay. Hazmat and poison control we talked about. Legal support systems. If something goes wrong, there has to be a system where legally it can be investigated. You saw what happened over here? The investigative journalists went and tried to look into it. The families hired lawyers. So there has to be a legal framework within which you can operate. That means it has to be able to enforce what the law is also. Okay? Now, volunteerism, big thing in the United States. A lot of schools, a lot of faith-based, religion-based activities, they go and volunteer in these aged care facilities. Just helping them spend the time, helping the older people to relate to young people. Maybe they might think they're like their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. It's a kind of mental stimulation which is very important for both sides, not only for the older person, but for the younger people also. I remember my 3 children when they were in the States. They would love to volunteer. They would love to volunteer. It was like an outing for them, but I think they enjoyed the experience. My son would go and just play guitar, 3 or 4 old ladies sitting around there. He'll say, Auntie, come, shall we sing some song? And, he and the ladies, they'll go all excited now, For the next 5 or 10 minutes, they're singing songs. My other son will love to help in what's called a soup kitchen. They have certain parts of town where there are a lot of homeless people, and some church, some school, some clubs. Once a week, they'll say, okay, we are going to have a soup kitchen. We are going to go and make soup and feed the people. So my son would love to go and help in the soup kitchen. And at his age, now this was about maybe age 13, 12, 13, 14, about that age. They would start thinking. They see the poor people. It affects them. They would say things like, Daddy, can we buy another can of soup because I'd like to take it and go with me to the kitchen? So that's nice thinking. Nice thinking. Advocacy, same as legal support systems, but it's not with a legal sense. See, trust NGOs, faith-based organization, and even the media, the newspapers. They can go and do some investigative journalism and publish it in the newspapers to find out who this kind of thing is happening. Where I live, near the Sri Jayawardhanapura General Hospital, when I drive along that Talawatugoda road, I noticed that there was an old folks' home advertised. It was on the left side near the Madivella junction, and it had a name related to a Christian Roman Catholic faith. Okay, and I was new in the area. When I saw it, I thought, "Ooh, wow, that's nice." The name of the organization is called Vincent de Paul. It's a Roman Catholic thing, and it's there all over the world. And I was surprised when I saw it. I said, "Oh my God, they got Vincent de Paul here in Sri Lanka also." About a month later, suddenly in the newspapers, they have a huge article all about abuse at this Vincent de Paul thing. And I thought, wow, I can't believe this. So I started reading. And they talked about everything that was not right about the place. Now somebody has taken the trouble to go and read that. And now they have changed the management. I read that also in the papers later on. So that means that publicity, resulted in some kind of a change, hopefully for the better. Then we are talking about aging healthily versus aging with medical problems. We talked about that earlier. At some point, you have to make sure that the system will take care of your medical problems and not keep you there neglected. So then comes the final thing, end of life. You may be getting old, you may be in a nice place, you may be taking your medicines on time, but it's time to go. It's time to go. And just like Julia Pierce's husband, Chuck, he knew it was time to go. And he was like, "Oh, I'm ready to go. I just don't want anybody to make money off of me. I'm ready to go." So that's saying a lot. He was not frightened of death. He was not frightened of death at all. He just didn't want anybody to make money off of him. I thought that was real funny. And dying with dignity. It's a very important subject. Dying with dignity is a very important subject. And although it's not publicly accepted in Sri Lanka, now a couple of states in the United States and a couple of countries in Europe, they have given the right to an older person to kill themselves, to commit suicide, although the word suicide is wrong. You want to be in control of your death. Okay, I don't want to live anymore. All right, so give me some injection or give me some poison or give me something so that I'll pass away. Now that was considered a no thing in all religions and all of that. But now there are about 3 or 4 European countries and now about 3 states in the United States that has approved it. Okay? So there are some conditions that have to be met, but if those conditions are met, then you have decided to exit the world under your conditions, which I think is a very brave thing. Now, if the person is suffering from pain and is terminal cancer and all of that, you can feel the pain. But there are people who are not in pain, but they say, well, I don't want to burden the family anymore. I don't want to be living like a vegetable anymore. I'm not in pain. So your mental faculties are like intact, but you don't want to be a burden on other people, and you want to die. Those are very brave concepts. Do you know, in the Eskimo population, now of course they are not really called Eskimos anymore, but in the old days, when an Eskimo got very old and could not go hunting, remember they lived by hunting. They hunted whales and other sea animals plus bears. When they couldn't do that anymore, they figured out that they are a burden to their children or to the younger generation. And they would one day walk out to get mauled and eaten by a bear. And their thinking was, pretty soon that bear will feed my children, because the children will go and catch the bear. That concept of is going round in a circle. So having control over your death is also a big issue. As we get older, I think it will become more an issue that the public will be forced to think about. Okay. All right. Now let's see. What's the time now? How much? 12:05. Okay, these are some of the other issues that you have to talk about. The leadership that is required for that, okay. Workplace essentials, okay, that we have done, okay. All right, I'm going to finish off after we do this, okay. In the USA, the government does not get actively involved in healthcare till one is age 65. At age 65, under the Social Security system, a plan called Medicare becomes activated. That started in 1935 and all of that. Okay, let's go that way. Okay. And now human rights and dignity in living is given more emphasis than just health status alone. Okay, all right. Now, that's not what I'm going to talk about. Aged care is fully regulated in the US. All right. Now, this Medicare system I was telling you about, it started in 1935, and they kept expanding the benefits for the older people. Okay. Although I'm living in the United States, I also have Medicare coverage because I was there for a long time and I paid in money into the system. Okay. So they first had what is called Part A. That means if you got admitted, they'll pay for everything, but not for anything else. Then they expanded it and put Part B, or we pay for outpatient care also. That's more money for the government that they have to spend on. Okay. So now then they have Part C. Anybody who has failed kidneys or end-stage kidney disease, they get put on a kidney transplant list. And I know a couple of Sri Lankans also who got their kidneys like that. In the USA, of course, they have to be USA residents. Okay. Now, this is what somebody wrote. Said we should introduce a thing called Medicare Part G. You're a sick senior citizen and the government says there is no nursing home care available for you. So what do? Plan G gives anyone 65 years or older a gun. That's the G. And 4 bullets. Okay. You're allowed to shoot 4 politicians because they're the ones who say that there's no money. Okay. Of course, this means you will be sent to prison, where you will receive 3 meals a day, you'll get a roof over your head, and all the health care you need. These are American jails. Okay. You get a gym, and you can get a library, and there are music instruments that you can play on. These are all available in American jails. Okay. You need new teeth, no problem. New glasses, no problem. New knees, hips, kidneys, lungs, whatever, they are all covered. Added bonus, your kids can come and visit you. And who's paying for all of this? Because you are in prison. The same government that says we can't provide it to you if you're out of prison. So go to prison and they'll look after you. Okay? And it also has added benefits. You have got rid of 4 politicians. So it's a lovely package. This is kind of a joke that's going. And because you're a prisoner, you don't have to pay any income tax either. See? So you are like free after the age of 65. Plan G. All right. Okay. Okay, so that's about all I'm going to talk about today. Some of these other areas that I mentioned, these slides are all going to be available to you. Okay. I'm supposed to set an assignment for you. An examination questions plus assignment. The examination questions have already been given over to Shamini, so she will give you. The assignment is something I have to think about. It's kind of a long essay-like response we have to write. Not a short one, it's a long one, maybe about 3,000 words or so, even more. About a certain topic related to aging and medical problems with aging and aged care management. You'll be given a deadline as to by when, but you'll have enough time, about 2 months or 3 months. So you'll have to do a little bit of reading and research here and there, but it won't be difficult to get the reference material because they'll be easily available on the internet. Okay, so that's all for today. Thanks for listening. I want to be a little bit frank and honest with you because I'm learning to figure out whether I'm doing the worthwhile thing. 2 lectures you heard from me. Did you folks learn anything new at all? Or was it everything that you did? If you think you learned something, raise your hand. All right, don't try to please me, okay? I mean, if you did, just let me know. Now, did I speak fast or too slow, or did I do it in a way that you were wanting to learn but couldn't understand what I was saying? Could everybody understand what I was saying? Okay? All right? Lift your hand. Okay. I'm going to get full marks. Okay, that's it. All right. Thank you very much. I will submit all these slides to Shamini by about the middle of next week, and in some of those, in those slides, there may be some references that you can refer to, that you can get information on. Okay.